Hi, my name is Dan Gomez, and this is Mental Health Super Omnia. Mental health above all. We identify and understand mental health issues and the paths for help. Eating disorders have the second highest mortality rate of any mental health illness in the United States. When many think about eating disorders, they usually think about affluent white women, teenage or adult, obviously thin, wanting to be thinner, obviously impacted by magazines or even TV. But in fact, eating disorders affect people of any gender, any race, any age, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. Now, in addition to wanting to talk about eating disorders, it turns out in this country that we label weeks, and we have just finished National Eating Disorder Week. So in order to talk about eating disorders and National Eating Disorder Week, we want to understand this whole area better. We brought in Clara Pritchett. Clara is the executive director at the Body Empowerment Project. Clara, can you tell us about your organization first?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. As Daniel said, I am Clara Pritchett, and I am the Executive Director of Body Empowerment Project. Our mission at Body Empowerment Project is to reduce eating disorder risk and give students the skills to live peacefully and healthily in their bodies through meaningful near-peer interaction. So our main program offering is a 10-week longitudinal program based on minimizing risk factors and building protective factors against eating disorders. So those protective factors look like things that we try to build every day among our youth and adolescents as well as in adults. Things like self-compassion, self-esteem, resiliency, community building. And those risk factors are more body eating disorder dependent. Things like body image dissatisfaction and weight stigma and thin ideal internalization. So we take groups of students through a 10-week program covering topics like beauty and beauty standards, health at every size, consent and boundaries, positive self-talk, all with the goal of reducing eating disorder risk. So we've done significant research on our program that shows that it clinically significantly reduces eating disorder risk and increases body appreciation among our participants. And so over the past 5 years that we've been around, we've worked with about 1,500 students who've done our full program and about an additional 1,500 who have done modified or shorter term programming. In addition to our youth programming, we also do professional development and talks and trainings for youth-centered professionals, including nurses and teachers, as well as camp counselors, kind of anybody who interacts with youth, for how to build a more body positive, body neutral ecosystem in their space, as well as kind of an eating disorder 101 and getting more information about eating disorders and signs and symptoms to people who just don't get a lot of information about eating disorders, whether that's in their schooling or in general, especially with the populations we work with that are mostly Black and Brown low-income youth.
Great. Now, we're going to talk more in depth about eating disorders and about your organization in just a minute. But let's bring into the discussion Kathryn Lodwick-Jones. Now, Kathryn is a licensed professional counselor. She's the leader of the Eating Disorder Center of Excellence at Equilibria Psychological. And Kathryn, I'm very curious. Why did you start the Eating Disorder Center of Excellence?
For my entire life, I've done things out of passion and joy. And I started the Eating Disorder Center of Excellence actually being driven by anger, and anger at the lack of resources for folks in the outpatient setting to treat eating disorders across all ages, especially young people. We think about being called to things, and I find myself wanting to call people to join me. And so I started it to fill this need so that folks of all ages, kids, teens, and adults, could have consistent available support. We have so much support, especially in the Philadelphia area, for residential and inpatient and what we call higher levels of care, like intensive outpatient programs. And then when clients progress and discharge, there's so few insurance-based options to have a regular eating disorder therapist in the long term.
Okay, so we know why you started the organization, and we know that you perhaps were a little bit angry. Clara, your organization was actually started by somebody else. Can you tell us the origin story of your organization?
Yeah, so Body Empowerment Project was founded in July 2021, and it started with my two co-founders, who are Christina Miranda and Amanda Moreno, who did work at UPenn when they were undergraduates with their Project Heal chapter, another amazing eating disorder organization. And they started really looking at what was available for the students in the communities around where they were going to school. They saw that there was just not a lot of options for even just discussions about eating disorders or body image issues in the schools or in the communities that they were working with. So they started coming up with an idea for a program and ended up winning a $100,000 prize from UPenn to start Body Empowerment Project. And it's only grown ever since.
So if I'm not mistaken, went to Penn, but if I'm not mistaken, that was the President's Prize.
Yes.
And there's not very many of those given out. So that's excellent for them. They were interested in eating disorders. Is there a reason why? You may have disclosed that on your website.
Yeah, so Christina is very open about how she struggled with an eating disorder starting at a very young age. And there weren't a lot of people who noticed what she was going through. And one of the people who really flagged that she was struggling and falling into illness was her school nurse. And she was the one who got her help. And Amanda discusses as well that she's an immigrant from Cuba and she didn't see a lot of representation of people who looked like her, and she was struggling to feel like she could fit in, and that ended up impacting her body image as well.
So let's think about that. She didn't have a lot of people that saw that she had an eating disorder, didn't flag it. Kathryn, is that very typical in eating disorders? Is it typical that people kind of fly under the radar until there's a significant health issue, or is it not that way?
Oh, absolutely. And I think especially for young people and folks in marginalized communities, whether you are queer or a person of color, I think certain communities have done a great job at working to destigmatize mental health and seeking therapy. But in the eating disorder space, especially, people of different sizes and backgrounds and presentations often don't see themselves represented and not talked about. How do you get help either?
Yeah. And I think I would like to add of few people who have an eating disorder look like, quote unquote, they have an eating disorder. Only 6% of people who are diagnosed with eating disorder are clinically underweight. And so most people, no matter who you are or how you identify, don't look like they have an eating disorder.
When you talk about eating disorders, it kind of sounds monolithic. Is there one? Is there a multitude of eating disorders? Is one more dominant than the other? Give us a clue.
Well, there are many types of eating disorders. The most common eating disorder is binge eating disorder, as well as unspecified feeding or eating disorder, which is where you don't meet the clinical requirements for a specific eating disorder, but eating disorder and disorder eating is impacting your life immensely. And then you have, I think, what people understand eating disorders to be, which are bulimia and anorexia, binge purge behavior, and severe restriction. And then we're also continuing to get more research on things like ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. And we're only going to kind of get more information about eating disorders as people continue to do the research that really needs to be done that is very much underfunded.
So we know that there's a multitude of eating disorders, and as I mentioned early on, in this country, we will have different weeks, different months named after or named for certain organizations or certain causes. We just finished up Eating Disorder Week. What was the theme of Eating Disorder Week, and what was the objective?
Yeah, so people come up with many themes for Eating Disorder Awareness Week, but there is a collective of eating disorder organizations that we are also a part of that decided on the theme, fighting for change, committed to change.
And what's the change? What are we looking for? What are we changing?
The reason I really liked this theme is I think it applied to a lot of different organizations, no matter what you are working on. So we have organizations in this collective that are really treatment focused. We have ones that have helplines. We have ones that have peer support groups. We have ones that are working to get people into treatment who may have access. And so we saw fighting for change is something that our advocacy organizations could really look to. They're trying to fight for change to get increased insurance access, or fighting for specific bills, like maybe getting helplines on the backs of student IDs. Or we also have folks who are talking about fighting change for yourself, individual change of pushing through and continuing to support your own recovery. And then committed to change really came out of, I think, as we talked about with eating disorders in general, there's a lack of representation and discussion for people who don't meet the typical stereotype for who develops an eating disorder. And as a collective, as a group of organizations, we really want to push for more diversity and inclusivity in our own work as well as in representation, while also recognizing that there are people of color and people from who don't typically fit the eating disorder stereotype who are doing this work and highlighting their voices as well.
So you used the word fighting for change, and Kathryn, when I think about fighting, I think about you know, as we were just talking about, I think about stigma, I think about that individual journey, I think about treatment, maybe even prevention. From a mental health perspective, where do you get involved in this whole process? Is it with families? Is it with the person that is looking to deal with an eating disorder, that individual journey? Where is it that mental health professionals such as yourself get involved?
I think to be the most effective, it's finding ways to incorporate all stakeholders, not just the client and supporting them with resources and care and education, but advocating for them and supporting them and advocating for themselves, whether that's with their caregivers or their educators, if they're a school student, you know, their healthcare providers. I think especially working with kids, it's providing education to other places where kids might go, whether it's camps or youth groups or dance classes, right? Finding ways in which we can incorporate kind of a grassroots approach to community and really make these small changes that have such a huge impact on even just one person's life.
But earlier, when we were talking about the origin story for the Body Empowerment Project, the only person that noticed was a nurse, school nurse, which was great. You know, I mean, I have kids. I can't imagine. Obviously, it isn't true. Obviously, it doesn't always happen. How is it that we miss in our own families, we miss the signs that there is an eating issue? What should we be looking for? How do we miss it? What should we be looking for? Are there any tells? Or before we got online, we were talking about cards just for a second, and a tell is something where you kind of disclose something that you've got that other people don't. So what's the tell with an eating disorder? What is it that what are we looking for here?
I think one issue that comes up a lot is that a lot of the things that signify an eating disorder are things that we tend to glamorize in society, discussing that you're skipping meals, deciding that you are going to eat smaller portions. The most relevant precursor for developing an eating disorder is dieting behavior, especially in youth, which is something that we often will applaud. We applaud weight loss as well. And so it can be a long time when somebody is engaging in these behaviors that somebody realizes that it's detrimental to their health. And then I think a lot of what I talk about with folks, especially in the school setting, are also eating disorders tend to have similar symptoms as many other mental illnesses. So you're looking for things like increased fatigue, slipping of grades, isolation from peers, especially when that has to do with events that involve things around food, or continuing to remove yourself from those situations. All of those things can indicate disorder eating or eating disorder behavior, and then you have to pay attention to what the actual behaviors might look like if you're seeing this in the people around you or your kids or your students.
So, you know, I'm sorry, please.
I think just being able to pay attention to, is there a significant decrease in quality of life? Because you're absolutely right, Clara. Oftentimes we see with depression, some people's appetite changes, and that's not necessarily a red flag that they have binge eating or anorexia, but it's something to look at in the bigger picture. And I think that I'm really heartened to hear that this nurse was able to be aware and provide support, because still to this day, there are pediatricians who need further education. All medical providers need further education for how to screen for eating disorders. When we live in a culture that promotes dieting and restriction as something healthy or being in control of yourself. When we are treating weight with GLP-1s, it can be overwhelming for parents to know to trust or where to get support for their child they're concerned about.
Yes.
So, Kathryn, this is not the first time we've talked about eating disorders. And I recall the last time we talked about it, I had to be very careful about talking about specific type of eating disorders because it could be triggering for people. Mm-hmm. So talk to me about this whole triggering issue. Is there something that from a societal standpoint we should be aware of that could potentially cause harm without us even realizing, or or even in individual conversations, should we not say something to somebody that we suspect has a particular issue? Talk to me about triggering.
I think that the term triggering sometimes gets a bad reputation because I think that in many ways it kind of implies that we shouldn't be talking about vulnerable things. And that's exactly what we want to avoid doing. We want to encourage dialogue so that people can reduce isolation. That said, I think when people are talking about not triggering folks, it's really about the informed consent about, are you able to receive my story that might really evoke a lot of emotions, right? Can we talk about this and we both feel safe and supported, rather than me maybe spewing a lot of really upsetting things that you're not prepared to hear or regulate yourself about.
Yeah, I think I also go back to, we have agreements in our groups with our students as well as we try to uphold with our facilitators as well, and something that I just uphold in my life of, we try not to talk about numbers, whether that means clothing sizes or weight or calories. And we also try to refrain from discussing specific eating disorder behaviors, because especially what you don't want is you don't want someone to read your story and then engage in those behaviors because they were told that it quote unquote worked for you, because to them, that is still their mindset.
Interesting. You just mentioned numbers, and I was just about to ask you what percentage of your population in your organization, the people that you've helped, are boys. That's an okay question. It is a number, but there's men and women. What percentage of boys?
Yes, very different number. We actually, I think a lot of people are surprised when I tell them that our breakdown tends to be, so semester after semester, it changes a little bit, but about 65% with girls, about 30% boys, and about 5% non-binary and gender non-conforming students. And so we have some groups that I find really interesting, or some groups don't always have a choice in engaging with our program. Of course, they do not have to participate, but they may be in the room with them. But we have some groups that boys select to be the majority of our programming, and they'll come as groups of friends and they'll have these discussions, and it ends up being a boy heavy group. And I never really know what it's going to look like or who's going to engage in our programming. All we do is we tell them that it's about building self-esteem and confidence, and we talk about hitting those risk factors, that we talk about body positivity and body neutrality and body image, and they decide they want to come, and I am never going to turn them away.
You talk about body image and body positivity. There's been a lot of talk about that. There's been obviously a push on TV and advertisement to be more inclusive of you, if you will, of different body types. But we can't help but be inundated with certain messages. Just as an example, I see men on TV or in advertisements, if they have their shirts off, at least half of them have washboard abs. Okay, well, very few of us have washboard abs. Certainly not me. So the messages that people are getting, men or women, is it still an overwhelming negative message in terms of body positivity? And is there something we should be doing about that?
I think we're seeing even less and less body diversity in media in the past few years, and I think it's only getting worse in that area. There's less people. Brands are taking their plus size clothes off the shelf. We're seeing more and more people who are publicly engaging in disordered eating behavior. And we have some amazing people who are really fighting to get their accounts banned and ban specific hashtags and get banners on social media saying that if you're looking this up, you might be struggling with something, here's a number you can call. But I think that's only representation is probably only going to get worse for at least a little while.
I think that both male and female identifying people equally are harmed by harmful stereotypes and expectations about what their body should look like, oftentimes surrounded around value, whether it's the messaging that many women experience about needing to be thin or needing to be this way. Men also are expected to be incredibly lean or muscular or large or masculine, or it's all about looking a certain way to be viewed as valuable, attractive, and powerful.
And that if you work hard enough, you can look like that. And not that these people who tend to look like that have exorbitant amounts of money or time or trainers or nutritionists that maybe you don't have access to, that it takes a lot to get to that amount of muscle mass and that amount of body fat that is just not attainable for most people, and not attainable for most people's just genetic makeup in general.
But it seems to me that times have changed dramatically, right? I mean, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, people said things to children, to young women, young men, that perhaps were we'd see today to be harmful, right? And so that we've gotten much better in that regard. Maybe we've swung a little bit too far, don't know, but we've certainly gotten much better. Are you saying that we're still giving off unconsciously negative perceptions or negative thoughts to people? And if we are, give me an example of one.
Mm-hmm. I think what happens is I think the sentiment remains the same, but the words can change. And so the things that I think about is people aren't talking so openly about like the cabbage soup diet or like things that were popular 40 years ago, but we're talking about clean eating and wellness culture, and keto, whatever is big in the moment. So the sentiment is still, you must be thin. Here are the things that you should do to get this body that we value and that we will still are. You're more likely to get hired. People in smaller bodies make more money. Like, we're still giving off that sentiment, even if the words are changing.
I would agree. I think that the shift in the wording is still coming from the same place, right? Maybe we've made progress with not commenting objectively about someone else's body, but then we're putting that on ourselves, trying to demonstrate status by saying, well, I'm now fitting in this pair of pants, or I no longer eat this cake when I want it.
Interesting. So from a family perspective, what should we be doing? What things should we be looking for? What things should we be promoting in order to make sure that our family is healthy?
I think being able to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations. And when I say uncomfortable conversations, I mean both things that might make your kids uncomfortable, but also might make you uncomfortable yourself based on your relationship with food or your body. Being able to talk about food from a neutral perspective, being able to encourage conversations about concerns, and really listening to. I was thinking the other day, I had a middle school client a couple of years ago, and what stuck with me was she would share these stories about how her friends, their lunches were changing. They never talked about it, but she noticed they would come in with less food, or suddenly everyone was eating cucumbers, and then only cucumbers, and then only one cucumber. And how she wished that an adult did something about it, but she didn't really know who or what would happen, but she saw there was a problem. I think being able to notice these subtle but profound behaviors that might be happening and be able to address them, have the confidence to be able to have these conversations.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I think that's exactly what we try to bring into these spaces of, maybe it's not somebody who you see every day. It's not a teacher. It's not a parent, but you have these mentors in your space who you can talk to about these things that are going on. And I've done things with students where then a group of us, I said, why don't we go talk to your counselor and I'll go with you. And I can be an advocate for them and help them find the words to describe the things that they're talking about, that they say that they really are struggling with and they need help with. And then we can bring it to a trusted adult in their space.
Earlier we talked about an individual journey. In fact, I think that's the phrase you used, Clara. And you mentioned the journey that one of your founders went on, which ultimately led to your organization. The question I wanted to ask both of you is, in that journey that people are on, as that are impacted by, that are directly impacted, personally impacted by eating disorders of one sort or another, are there commonalities? Are there certain way stations that we usually see people in, or is it, are we like constantly in stealth mode here, and there's nothing that we can pick out and go, or here they are at this point in time. They're on step 6 out of the 12-step process.
I think that's a difficult question, because I think that it does tend to be individual. I think too, like, we know, like, relapse rates in eating disorders are very high. So we have people who maybe have been in recovery for a very long time who then begin to relapse and engage in disordered eating behaviors. And so I think that there are precursors to eating disorders, like dieting as youth. We also know that there are risk factors from childhood, like histories of food insecurity, increase your risk of developing an eating disorder. We also know that there are commonalities between people who tend to develop an eating disorder. People who are kind of like more type A perfectionist personalities are more likely to develop an eating disorder, but that does not mean other people are not susceptible to it as well. But I think it is very individual.
I agree. I think each person's experience and journey is different, but I do think the commonality is that no matter the eating disorder, it thrives in isolation. And so, of course, everyone needs a different type of support, but everybody's going to need some type of community or mental health support.
Yeah. So let's talk about that support for a second, because it's troubling. Many of us want to make sure that everybody does well, everybody's happy, healthy, successful, whatever the case may be. If somebody in my family or in anyone's family has this particular issue, what am I doing here in order to demonstrate support? Am I not talking about it? Am I acknowledging it? Am I talking about it privately with them? What am I doing in order to demonstrate support?
I think if it's somebody very close to you, I think making yourself available and open to engage in conversation on kind of their terms and when they're ready for it. Increase being knowledgeable yourself on different types of eating disorders and kind of how you speak to yourself and about others around you. Making sure you're not engaging in shameful body talk or diet culture in your home. And I think more than anything, like I said before, having you be a space for the people in your life that they know that you are somebody that they can talk to if they're struggling.
Not talking the diet culture, not talking about diets is probably a difficult thing. Mm-hmm. When you look at the average person in the United States is average adult is probably overweight, and by some medical definition. If that's true, how could we not talk about diet culture? How could we not talk about food in that way?
I think there's a difference between talking about food and engaging in diet culture behavior. Culture behavior is described as engaging in behaviors to achieve fitness and shaming bodies and food in a way that makes things good or bad. And I think there's a way to talk about eating nutrient-dense food and hydration and giving your body the fuel that it needs without engaging in negative food talk or shaming your body or others' bodies.
I agree with that. And I think too, I was thinking back to the word triggering kind of getting this bad reputation. I think that the word diet itself has also gotten a misrepresentation, right? There's not inherently anything wrong with saying that you are engaging in a diet, but it's looking at, is this a restriction, right? For example, I am lactose intolerant, so I am on a dairy-free diet, not by choice. I assure you, not by choice, right? If you have celiac disease or an allergy, you are inherently on a diet that is having to avoid food for reasons, but it isn't choosing for restriction or weight loss or elimination or over control. I think being able to be clear about that when talking about food and talking about joy, food joy, engaging in adaptive strategies to engage in food, right? Being able to honor hunger cues, sharing food communally, being able to talk about it more in a relational way rather than a restrictive or shaming way.
I'm also a big proponent of weight neutral health messaging. We know that weight stigma not only increases isolation and puts you at risk for things like depression and anxiety, but also weight stigma overall and weight shaming actually leads to weight gain in people. So when people are engaging in shameful behavior, in shameful rhetoric, it's actually doing the opposite of what they're thinking. And one thing I say to people all the time is, well, if you were to tell somebody how they should lose weight or how they should engage in weight loss behavior, like what are the things that you say? And they would tell me things like, well, I tell them to eat more fruits and vegetables. I tell them to exercise. I tell them to drink water and sleep. And I'm like, yeah, you can talk about all of those things just as they are. Those are health promoting behaviors, and engaging those behaviors may lead to weight loss. It may not, but we know that that will increase your health markers and make you probably feel better and happier. And you can talk about all of those things without engaging in weight loss talk.
So, we talked a little bit about statistics in the very beginning and how devastating eating disorders are. But where are we in this whole issue? Is the incidence of eating disorders going up? Are we more attuned to it, and so numbers are rising because we're more attuned to it? Are numbers dropping? Where are we?
Mm-hmm. We do know that eating disorder rates are increasing, and eating disorder prevalence is increasing at younger ages. I think that it is a combination of things, that I think that there is increased awareness and also increased incidences. But we can't really know that fully. But from the numbers that we're seeing, rates of eating disorders are increasing. And eating disorders specifically in youth under 12 are increasing at higher rates.
Do you agree with that, Kathryn?
Among boys are increasing faster than eating disorder rates among girls.
Do I agree with that? I agree with that. And I think, I was thinking about the other day, I was thinking about the numbers actually, because I had looked them up, and someone had compared it to the rates of autism going up. And I think there's probably a similar process to, we have more screening tools now. It's not that necessarily more people than before are experiencing autism or eating disorder. It's that there's more education to screen it, to get that person assessed and helped. And so, of course, we want to pay attention to what might be societal, environmental, genetic things that might increase these rates. But at the same time, in many ways, it's a good thing that we're seeing these numbers to be more attentive to folks who need the help.
So again, let's go back to this individual journey. Are people recognizing that they have an issue and then they're raising their hand? Is that a thing, or is it typically the school nurse or somebody else that identifies the problem and gets the ball rolling?
I think it depends also where you are in your eating disorder behavior. I think that there are people who are really understanding that they're struggling and that they need help. And then I think there are peers and folks around them who are seeing their behavior and seeing the symptoms and are flagging it to somebody else. I think it really, again, depends on the person.
I agree.
Okay. So you're providing education, Clara, in order to help people understand understand about eating disorders. Mm-hmm. The people that come to your programs, they've already got an interest, or no?
So we don't talk about eating disorders specifically a lot in our youth programming. We talk about those risk and protective factors, and I think eating disorders come up, but it is part of a wider conversation that we're building this prevention strategy of minimizing those risk factors and building those protective factors. There are students in our program that we have then identified as needing higher levels of care, and we get work to get them to the next level beyond us, whether that's their school nurse or one of the partners that we work with. But it really depends on the person, because we also have folks who maybe they've struggled with body image and disordered eating or eating disorders in the past who want to then work to educate their peers. We have folks who are just interested in body image and mental health in general, and maybe it doesn't have anything to do with them.
Now, you mentioned risk factors and preventative things.
Mhm.
Earlier on, you identified one risk factor. What are other risk factors for eating disorder behavior, and what are some of the preventative factors?
Yeah, so some of the risk factors that we're working to hit are body image dissatisfaction and thin ideal internalization and weight stigma. And some of those protective factors are self-esteem and self-compassion and positive body image and building community and resiliency amongst our youth. And so a lot of it comes from having like we were talking about, having space to speak openly about these topics and these issues and your own struggles in a community of people who have a mutual foundation or understanding of these topics and the language that we can use to discuss them.
You know, Kathryn, when I think about younger people in middle school or in high school, there are many that will say, it was the best time of their lives. But there's a vast number of people that will say it was an absolutely brutal environment. Mm-hmm. So if it was a brutal environment, how does that play into the risk factors and to the protective factors? It's a brutal environment, so you're going to get shamed in one way or another because you did something stupid or somebody said something about your body.
I think one of my favorite things that I've ever heard coming out of our program, that I've heard from multiple teachers at the schools that we work with, is that the students after completing our program are nicer to each other. They're just nicer to each other. They have a better understanding of how to engage with each other and how to resolve conflict amongst each other, and that the words that they say have impacts on other people. And overall, they're just nicer to each other. And I love hearing that all the time, because you're right, middle and high school can be really brutal. And so if we can create groups of people who are friendly to each other and stand up for each other and stand up for themselves, that's going to make that easier.
Is there a social... Go ahead, please.
I keep interrupting you, Dan. I was wondering where you were going with that anecdote, because I would say the majority of folks really despise their middle school experience. And I want to lead with that, in that navigating puberty, just the physical, emotional experience, is horrible, right? You feel terrible because you feel terrible. Your peers are also incredibly uncomfortable, so they're not going to perhaps willingly be as kind and forgiving to you, let alone themselves. And I think what I love about your program, Clara, is just having everybody in community, because you can learn how to be kind to each other by being kind to yourself, and vice versa. We certainly can teach these skills at the individual level in therapy or in families or individual relationships, but when everyone's in many ways in the same boat of middle school, for example, dealing with some similar biochemical challenges, being able to get at the root and addressing, you're already feeling terrible, let's reduce some of these risk factors before they become a systemic problem.
Yeah.
So let me ask each of you a couple of questions. So I'm going to ask one question. I'd like you each to answer it, okay? What is the one thing that I should do now that I understand a little bit more about eating disorders? What's the one thing I should do? Take away, I've listened to what you guys have said. I'm going to do what?
I have two things I really want to say. That's why. I think one thing that I love being is a source of support and conversation to the people around me. And I think, like I was saying earlier, not only when you're identifying people who might be at risk or engaging in disordered eating behavior, just be a space where people can talk about the issues that they're seeing. And especially with these taboo topics, like you want to be able to be a source of vulnerability for others and be able to engage in these conversations no matter what. Because I think what happens to me a lot is people will come to me and say, like, I'm seeing this happen, like, what do I do about it? I'm seeing my child engage in this behavior, like I need to be honest about, like, that I don't know what to do, and being somebody that somebody can come to with really, really hard discussions can be really helpful.
I think being a dynamic listener is a really effective tool, not just really listening critically to what people might be sharing with you, whether it's a struggle or a concern, but then asking questions to get them more engaged in the conversation, right? Rather than sharing your opinion, being able to go, what do you think about that, right? Maybe we see something in a what do they call it? A commercial. How do we talk about this so I can learn a little bit more about where you're at, especially if it's a vulnerable kid, and being able to have that dialogue where they feel safe to talk about it. You're not necessarily educating or imposing anything, but they feel safe to share what might be going on internally for them, what concerns might come up.
Yeah. And the more you know, the better questions you can ask.
Mm-hmm.
So some people idolize sports figures or their mother or father or someone else. There's a hero. There's some people have heroes. Are there heroes in the eating disorder realm?
Well, I have my own, but I think it's kind of funny that I will talk about people that I really see as celebrities that people have no idea who I'm talking about. Like, there are people who I personally idolize who are doing this work, people like Akira Gilbert at Project Heal, who is just a huge idol to me. People like Tigris Osborne at the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. She is a mentor of mine. I always talk about the book that changed my life when it comes to this, these issues is Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strangs. And she is somebody who I look up to immensely in the academic research side of this work. And then folks like Aubrey Gordon, who is a writer and the one of the co-hosts of the podcast Maintenance Phase, who I've been so lucky to be able to meet and have conversations with. I think there are people in this field and in this realm doing amazing work who more people should know.
I think of any celebrity heroes, and that's not to say they don't exist. I think the real heroes are the people that we see willing to talk about these things and confront these things in our communities, whether it's that school nurse, whether it's a children's book author addressing these issues to reach toddlers, not just waiting till it's a 13-year-old reading it, right? It's people who are making these spaces for conversations that maybe never reach a very big platform, but still make a difference at the individual level.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Clara mentioned a phrase, healthy at every size. What does that mean?
Well, people have their own definitions of health at every size. I think I will go back to the people who coined the term health at every size are the Association for Size, Diversity, and Health, ASDA. And I really think about health at every size as people being able to receive and engage in healthcare and healthy behaviors at any size and not being discriminated against or not have access to those behaviors or that care because of your size. I also think, like I was talking about earlier, you can engage in health promoting behaviors at any size, and that might result in your size changing and it might not. And those healthy behaviors are good regardless.
Anything to add, Kathryn?
I agree with all of that. I couldn't have said it better. And that's very much how I align with my definition. It's really addressing the weight stigma. It's less about, based on your size, you are going to have these health issues. It's being able to have access to care and not being discriminated against based on your body to get health care.
So tell me, each of you, if you could, what's the one thing you're always surprised people don't know?
Mm. I'm always surprised that I think people, specifically when it comes to eating disorders specifically, that people don't know how prevalent eating disorders are. I think they think about eating disorders as one individual issue that like 1 in a million people have this issue, that they then go away to this mythical land of treatment and then come back recovered. And when I tell people that 30 million Americans will develop an eating disorder in their lifetime, and you know somebody who knows somebody who has struggled with an eating disorder, they are shocked by that. Especially when I talk about the populations that we work with, which are mostly Black and brown low-income youth. The phrase I hear all the time is, I don't think this is an issue with our kids. And when I tell them the facts that that is actually not true statistically, they're shocked by that.
I wish that people knew that, and this is not to fearmonger, that anyone and everyone is at risk regardless of their age, race, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. There certainly are risk factors that are more prevalent in some people based on a variety of environmental genetic issues, but no matter who you are, it's important to get support if you need it and look out for each other.
Yeah.
So that actually leads me to the last question that I want to ask each of you. You talk about getting support. What are the 7 places that you get support at? Because you probably get support from many different places. Where do we get support?
I think it depends what you're looking for. I think that there are helplines out there. The ANAD has a helpline. The Alliance for Eating Disorders has a helpline. There are also peer support groups. ANAD runs a lot of free peer support groups as well for a variety of people, whether you're looking for a general support group or a specific BIPOC or LGBT plus.
BIPOC.
Black, Indigenous, or people of color, or support group. And then there are, I'll leave this to Kathryn to talk about, there are lots of places that have higher level of care options as well.
Mm-hmm. In Philadelphia, we are lucky to have a whole range of levels of care, whether it's residential, hospitalization, more intensive outpatient and outpatient. And I agree, I think it depends on the support you're looking for, whether it is support from a registered dietitian or a HAES aligned healthcare provider, whether you're PCP or pediatrician, or
HAES is that healthy at every size?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, health at every size. And maybe you're a loved one, whether you're a caregiver or a sibling or a partner, there are virtual and in-person support groups that exist. So, because it does take a toll on the community when you have someone navigating eating disorder.
So remember when I said I have one last question that I was going to ask you? I lied. I have one other question because I've been meaning to bring this up. You're talking about healthy at every size, but then we mentioned GLP-1s and how prevalent they are. They're just exploding in the marketplace. Is there a societal problem with the use of GLP-1s? Are they going to need some additional support in order to be successful? Do they need additional support in order to be successful getting off of GLP-1s? Where do GLP-1s fit into our discussion?
Mm-hmm. I think this is probably the question that I receive from adults most often right now in a conversation that I'm having with a lot of eating disorder professionals of, in the end, I am a big proponent of body autonomy. You can do what you want with your body, and that is none of my business. But I do think that we need increased screening tools to make sure that we are not giving GLP-1s to people who are already predisposed to developing an eating disorder. We do know that there are cases of people going into eating disorder treatment being on a GLP-1, and making sure that we're also not pushing people or pressuring people into taking medications that maybe they don't want to take, but they feel like they cannot receive the healthcare or the social status or whatever they see at the end of taking a GLP-1.
You ask your extra questions, and then I'll come back with my extra point of what I wish people knew. And I think it relates to GLP-1s in some way, which is that dieting and diet cycling is not a long-term solution for taking care of yourself or changing your body size. And I think that goes for GLP-1s, where I agree you need to make the decision that is for you with your trusted healthcare provider. and also engaging in a quick fix to feel better or solve a longer term issue impacted by genetics and lifestyle and so many things out of our control is potentially harmful. And we don't know a lot of the long-term effects.
Okay. So we've had a pretty wide-ranging discussion, right? I'd like for each of you to summarize. Take a minute, summarize what you think is important, what the point that you want to make, or one or 2 points you want to make. And if you want to promote something, your organization or some aspect of what we've talked about today, go ahead and do that. Clara, I'm gonna I'll let you go second, let you go last. Kathryn, I'll let you go first.
To summarize, I think that we have made a lot of progress in society in many ways to offer representation and challenge a lot of mental health and weight stigma, but the work isn't done. We need to constantly be engaging in conversations and challenging things at the bigger and smaller level and check in on each other without necessarily commenting on each other, right? Offer a safe space to receive someone's story and be available if they need it.
Yeah. And I think what I would like to summarize is to say that eating disorders affect all types of people and are developed and recovered from and healed in community as well as individually. And we need to tackle eating disorders from a wide variety of ranges. And so whether that is prevention, like we do at Body and Power Project, or advocacy or treatment, all of these options all of these resources in conjunction is what is going to make a difference in people's lives. And then if you would like to hear anything more about Body and Power Project, you can check out our website, which is www.bodyempowerment.net, or check out our Instagram, which is at body_empowerment_project.
Excellent. You two are doing great work in the community where I think everyone is helping a lot of people. Hopefully, given the size of the issue, we can help, not to use that same word, but we can help a lot more in the near future. So let me summarize and say that our sponsor today is Equilibria Psychological and Consultation Services. It is an insurance-based provider whose mission is to help individuals achieve their personal potential and long-term growth by compassionately and respectfully helping clients live in balance. Visit equilibriapcs.com, equilibriapcs.com. You can look for them on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can also look for me on Instagram, Daniel J. Gomez 24, and on LinkedIn. Now for the disclaimer. I am not a medical professional, and I am not providing medical advice. The opinion of our speakers is solely their own. This podcast is copyrighted and cannot be reproduced without the express written consent of EPCS Management, LLC.